Hey guys, Jason Stallworth here, and welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time, thank you for stopping by. I want to share 7 simple methods that's going to make your riffs sound heavier, even if you're just playing a 6-string guitar in E standard tuning. The cool thing is, this works regardless of what type of guitar, pickups, or amp sim that you have. In fact, we're not even getting into tone settings or any of that. That stuff's important, but only to a certain point, and I'll explain why at the end of this video. Your chords and choice of notes, those are going to be what makes your riff or your song heavy. It's going to give it that heavy feeling. Notice I said feeling. You see, heavy is not really a sound. It's a feeling that the person gets when they listen to your song or your riff. It's the feeling you get when you play it. And let me just share an example. I'm going to play this first part out loud real quick, okay? The choice of notes that we played there, again, is what gives it that heavy, and I would even say dark feel. Now, I did use the lowest notes possible to our advantage here. In other words, and I'll share what I did. I started out with the first two strings open, then I went to the E power chord. The next chord that I go to, and even the way I play the next chord, is what I feel like gives it that heavy feeling, and in this case, a heavy and dark feeling. So listen to this. So I'm going from an E power chord to an F, which is extremely typical for metal, especially if you're in standard tuning on a 6-string, right? But the way we played that, remember, going back to the choice of notes here, the way we played that is a little different than just a regular F power chord. Instead of 1 and 3, frets 1 and 3 on the first 2 strings, we go 1 and 2, followed by 1 and open. Together, again. So after that, we went to a variation of the G power chord, then followed by just a regular F power chord. And all together, that composition, to me, gives it that heavy feeling. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the concept, not necessarily the notes or the low notes, but just the concept in general that we just talked about as we go through these next steps. Now, this is the ultimate way to make a 6-string guitar standard tuning sound and feel heavy. Keep that in mind. Heavy is a feeling, not so much a sound, but we're just doing a little tactic with our power chords, specifically in this case being played on the A and the D strings, right? So if I were to play, for example, just a regular D power chord. Okay, sounds pretty cool. We don't really get that heavy feel from it though, right? Now if we do this, all we're doing here is we're starting out with an inversion of that power chord, which is basically starting out with the lower octave of the 5th note of the power chord, okay? So your standard, let me explain real quick here, your standard power chord starts with your root note, in this case, A string 5th fret. Your next note that you're playing, which in this case, D string 7th fret, well, that's called your 5th note, right? All we're doing here is we're just starting with the lower octave of that 5th note, which is going to be your E string 5th fret in this case. That gives it much more of a heavy feel. And you can use that tactic throughout, well, any power chord played on the A and D strings. Now add that concept in with our note choice, our composition, and there you have a little bit heavier of a feel. Number 3, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, is just the simple concept of palm muting. Just in general, palm muting is going to give you more of that heavy feel. Even though I just played a regular E power chord. Okay, that second time around when we're palm muting, that gave it a heavier feeling than just letting the power chord ring out. Now, it's not to say don't let your power chords ring out. I like the idea of mix and matching different techniques to make the song interesting, of course. However, my point here is just using palm muting in certain parts to give the song, your riff, that super heavy feel. And I want to share this one example, what you just heard. I want to share the breakdown of it real quick, because one part we use the palm muting to really chop things up, and I feel like that it does give it a heavier feel. So this part right here. And what I feel like gives it an even heavier feel is because I was doing something different before that. So I was arpeggiating the notes before that, and I guess I should have included arpeggiating notes, because that's not something you hear a lot. Yes, you hear it in metal music and in rock music, but it's not super common, if that makes sense. But when you go from something else, could be anything, could be the arpeggiating of notes, could be a power chord, could be a single note, whatever, and then you just dive right into this really cool palm muting riff. Well, the palm muting part and the song itself is even more impactful, and again, I think it just gives it a heavier feel. Before our next tip, I want to give a quick shout out to my sponsor for this video, Blackstar Amplification. The tones you're hearing in this video, including the full mix you heard in the intro, well, that's all coming from the Blackstar HT-5 RH amplifier. As you can see, this is a small amp that fits right on my studio desk. It's made for small home studios for silent recording, and you can even use your headphones with this amplifier. Now, this is part of Blackstar's new MK3 series of amplifiers, which also comes with their own cabinet software called CabRig. Now, I actually made a full video tutorial on how you can use this amplifier and get all these tones in your home studio, so check that out after you finish watching this. There will be a link in the description of this video. Alternate picking, or is often called tremolo picking in this case, when we're talking about like death metal, black metal, melodic death metal. And yes, this is one of those techniques, one of those methods that can really make your song not only sound heavy, but again, have that feeling of heaviness. It's like, whoa, this is heavy, and even kind of dark when we throw in what our choice of notes, right? So let me just play that out in the open real quick here. And this is one of those things that you can keep that going throughout the entire song. Like if you're writing like melodic death metal music, you're going to have a lot of that tremolo picking there. Or maybe you're just writing kind of a heavy, almost like a doom metal style song, like kind of what this thing turned out to be. But then we throw that in there. We just kind of sneak it in at the last part, like, whoa, okay, that just brought you somewhere else. Again, go back to the emotion. What emotion do you want to capture? What do you want people to feel when they hear your riff or your song? Now, there are two harmonizing parts that you might have noticed in this short little song that I wrote for this video lesson here. And that's that second guitar doing something different. That's all we're doing. And the next tip we go through here will make perfect sense on how to do this. I'll share that with you. But I've got one guitar. Let's go back to the tremolo picking we just did, doing this. The second guitar is actually doing this, and it's not going to make much sense, but you just heard the full mix just now. the second guitar is doing this. Those notes are basically a third up from the original riff, from the root riff, what we'll call it, right? So in other words, if I'm starting out here, okay, within that key, I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3. So if one guitar is doing this, at the same time, the second guitar is doing this. So what you do in this case is just figure out where your next note is, right, on that original riff, and just walk up to the third note above that for your second guitar. That's really all I'm doing. If we go back to this part right here, this one part where I'm going, right? So the second guitar is actually doing this. So again, that's just something, the harmonizing of the guitars, that's just something that can really not only make your riffs and songs sound and feel heavier, but can also just take the song to a new dimension. And it just sounds cool. In layman's terms, harmonizing metal riffs, they just sound cool. Now remember, we just talked about harmonizing the guitars. One guitar doing this and the second guitar doing something a little different, harmonize, or just doing something different in general. When you're recording two guitars, remember, they don't always have to be doing the exact same thing. It's cool for that second guitar to branch off and just do a little something different. Even if it's not harmonizing, maybe one guitar is chugging away on a note or a chord while the other guitar is just letting that chord ring out, and then they come together, right? It breaks things up a little bit. But the tip I want to give you, and what I feel like gives your song, your riff, a heavier sound and feel, is when you record these tracks in your studio, is I always record two rhythms for one, and then I hard pan each one. Okay, now I want to answer a question before it comes up. You might be saying, well, why don't you just record one rhythm and just copy that over to a second track and pan them? Well, that literally does nothing. It just adds volume. It's the exact same track. So reason number one I like to record two tracks is so I can have that second guitar doing something different at the appropriate time, or the time that's appropriate for me as I'm writing the song, right? I might want a harmony here or something different over here. But the second reason, and probably most important reason, is even if the guitars were doing the same thing throughout the entire song, I want to capture those little nuances and differences between the two guitars. They're never going to be perfect. That's not a bad thing. Of course, you don't want them to sound completely off, right? But there's going to be these little nuances between the two guitar tracks, and this is why I also hard pan each one, because that kind of captures those nuances a bit better, in my opinion, than leaving them up the middle. So that's something you can do in your studio. Is I'll record one track, record my main track. After I record it, I'll hard pan it left. Then I'll open up a new track. I'll go ahead and hard pan that one right and record that second guitar track. So that's going to sound really good in your studio monitors. And also, if you're recording with headphones, you're really going to hear those nuances even more. Tip number 7 has nothing to do with your guitar, but everything to do with your choice of bass guitar. So just a quick note, no pun intended, I'm actually using a 5-string bass guitar. The reason why I like to do that, well, I just like 5-string basses in general, but the big advantage on capturing that heavy feel is, well, you've got that 5th string, obviously, right? That's a B. So remember the chords that we're playing, the power chords we're playing on the A and D strings, and of course we're playing that, starting with that inversion, that lower octave of the fifth note, of course, that gives it a heavy feel and sound, right? That sounds super heavy. But then when you're playing those notes also on the bass using the B string, well, that just takes the heaviness to the next level. So I love a 5-string bass, but especially when you're using a 6-string guitar in standard tuning. And on top of using the strategies we talked about, right, with a 5-string bass, it's going to make people ask, hey, what are you tuned to, man? What tuning are you in? And you're like, I'm in E standard. No, that's not possible. Well, a lot of it's going to have to do with this bass right here. That's going to make it sound and feel heavy. Now, I mentioned in the beginning of this video that these methods really have nothing to do with the guitar, the pickups, nothing to do with your tone or any of that. And that's because I perceive heavy as more of a feeling, and I think that that comes from the actual song itself, meaning you could have 21 different guitar tones using different amps, cabs, whatever. And again, I'm not saying that's not important. I think it is important because you want to like the tone, obviously. However, I don't think that's necessarily what makes it heavy. I don't think it's the pickups. I don't think it's the type of guitar. I think it has to do more with even the riff itself, but the overall song. Again, kind of goes back to tip number 1 when we talked about the chords and the choice of notes. My opinion, and you can disagree, that's fine, but I feel that heavy is, again, more of a feeling than it is the type of guitar or amp or even the amp settings. So on that note, hey, if you want to learn more about the amp we talked about earlier, I'll put that video up there. That's what I use for this video. And if you want to do a deep dive into all my metal rhythm lessons, well, I'll leave the playlist to that right up there. So check that out. Guys, thanks so much for watching. As always, keep it metal and keep playing music.